There are things that happen to every one of us, but they're hard to contemplate. We're going to try to do that a little bit today, thinking about illness and death, coming right up. I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. So since I spend a lot of time making YouTube videos, I find myself often watching YouTube videos that other people make. I don't have a Netflix account. I watch very little television, some public television, but YouTube videos I find to be very interesting because I think a lot of the time they portray life the way it is. In real life, rather than, let's say, a fictionalized account of life done by professionals, these are oftentimes slices of real life done by non-professionals, which makes them more immediate to me. One channel I remember watching relatively recently, is a wonderful channel by a woman named Simone Giertz. And she makes robots. She makes crazy robots that do very silly things. And her channel has been very popular. She's been going for a while, and she's really a wonderful role model for young women, particularly who want to go into technology, into the sciences, into engineering, which needs more women in them. Those are ways of life that really do need more women to be part of them. And so she is a very telegenic, wonderful person. And I'm not exactly sure, but 6 months, a year ago, she came down with brain cancer. She had a very bad, tumor in her brain. And she vlogged about it. She would talk about it. She went in for an operation, talked all about the operation. Simone went through the operation, got better afterwards, did a video about her meditation, that she actually has built a sort of a robot, not really a robot, but a little device that keeps track of, how many days a year she meditates. Probably, I'm assuming, she doesn't really talk about it a whole lot, but probably to help her calm through this very difficult time. And in fact, Buddhist practices can be really good for this kind of, for these kinds of difficult times in our lives. And then more recently, she had another follow-up scan, and the brain tumor, which they were not able to get all of it, but most of it, is still growing. As I make this video, she's undergoing radiation therapy to help basically kill the cancer that's in her brain that remains. And hopefully, we can all hope, I hope, that she overcomes that. There's a large chance she will, and she'll go on to make many, many more YouTube videos and live a long life. I'm assuming that it's because I saw those videos and liked them, but other videos popped up on my feed, as YouTube tends to do, of other people who were going through cancer. And some of these people have not had as much success as we all hope that Simone will. They're absolutely wonderful, wonderful channels, and I'm not going to talk about the names of the channels right here. What I'm going to do is link them down below in the information box if you're interested in watching them. They're slices of real life of people who are going through cancer, young people, young men and women, and whose outcome was not successful. Who passed away. And so what their videos, what their vlogs do is to give you a real slice of life of what it's like living with terminal cancer. And these videos struck a nerve for me on many, many levels, struck many nerves for me. But one of the ones that's perhaps important, at least in my own background, is that I've had skin cancer. Now, it's basal cell carcinoma, which some of you will know is the least dangerous form of skin cancer. It's generally a benign form, a very slow-growing cancer, and it's the kind of thing that can be dealt with. And so I don't consider myself, in anywhere near the league of these other people, at least, fingers crossed at this point in my life. But I've had 5 different kinds. I've had it 5 different times. You'll see scars here and here on both sides of my nose and on my face. So I've gone through 5 different over 5, different years through over a decade of operations to take care of each one of these. While, again, I consider myself, as a cancer survivor, a very, very lucky one, because these are, at least at this point in my life, these are benign forms of cancer. Nevertheless, you have to always take cancer seriously, and the operations are not particularly fun. They can be painful, even with the best kinds of pain management. And, there is a certain amount of recovery afterwards, just so there isn't scarring and all the rest. So when I saw these videos, they struck a nerve with me. And of all of them, there's one of them that has, a woman has had a form of skin cancer, a much more aggressive melanoma cancer, that eventually took her life. What you see in these videos is not at all morbid. The people who make the videos, I think, they're extremely, I would say, brave people. And they want to show you the best face. And of course, they all have their hopes. And they want to show you the best times of their lives. And they want to also make clear the pains and difficulties that go through with having a disease like this, but to do it in a way that's uplifting. And that really does bring to the fore what it is to live a human life. But living a human life not as a superhuman, not as some kind of Superman, Superwoman, but as a real person with all the faults and foibles that real people have. These are real people. They're not fake. They're not constructed for a story. And as a result, the stories, I think, are incredibly, incredibly uplifting and wonderful to watch, but they'll make you cry. There's no doubt about it. They'll make you cry over and over and over again as their stories go to their end. We know many things intellectually about disease, about cancer, about terminal illness. But it's one thing to know about it intellectually and to read about it in a book, and it's another thing to actually witness someone going through it, somebody who's willing to take you along on the journey with them and show you their lives, and to do it in a way that is real and that is uplifting, but also that gives you the real picture of what it's like living that kind of life. And I think there's an enormous amount to be learned, both intellectually, but also, more importantly, from the heart, by seeing these kinds of stories. Because it really does help to, I think, foster compassion in ourselves. And I've said in a past video that I find myself oftentimes that I think that I should have more compassion than I do. And seeing these kinds of videos just brings out the compassion that's latent, at least in me, and I'm sure in all of you as well. There's also a book, a very relatively well-known book, that was out several years ago by the writer Christopher Hitchens, who was a polemical writer. I can go hot and cold on him, but he was very skilled as a writer. And he wrote a book about his struggle with cancer, because cancer eventually took his life. And his book is called Mortality. I'll also link it down below in the show notes. It's not a large book. It's a relatively small book, but it's a wonderful kind of meditation, in the sense of a musing and a thinking about his own end of his own days and his own struggles with cancer. And I think, again, these are the sorts of stories, real stories of real lives, that can help inform our own compassion. Now, contemplations of illness and death, many of us, I think, consider morbid. We think of them as not being fun. We're aversive to them. And I think probably some of our deepest aversions come up when we discuss illness and death. Things that we don't like to think about, things that we like to push out of our minds. But they were central to early mindfulness practice. Indeed, one of the largest portions of mindfulness of the body in the early text, the very earliest text, the foundational text of mindfulness practice, are what's called the charnel ground contemplations, where monastics would go to charnel grounds, which is where they would dispose of dead bodies in India, in the Indian tradition, and they would be left out for animals to eat, just to sort of continue the circle of life. Sometimes they would burn the bodies, but also sometimes they would be left out if the family didn't have the funds, perhaps, to burn them. They would be left out. And so monastics would go to these places and contemplate their own mortality among death. These meditations are described in some detail in the early texts, which you can read if you want to. I'll try to remember to put a link also to the Satipatthana Sutta, the sutta about mindfulness, down below. And if you go just down a bit, you will see those contemplations. I think we have to be aware of the aversion that's involved. Aversion is one of the things we practice with all the time in Buddhist practice. We practice with craving, that we like certain things, we like life, we like good experiences, we like pleasure. We're aversive to pains, to things that are unpleasurable, and of course to death as well. But in the longer term, the practice of wisdom is partly and very deeply a practice of learning to let go of ourselves, to let go of this notion of self-identity, to let go of the connection, of a feeling of close connection to our own bodies, because our own bodies will decay during our lifetime. If indeed we're lucky enough to live to 80, 90, 100 years, as we all would want to, I assume, we will see the decay of our bodies in real time. And so being ready for that, I think, is a critical part of Buddhist practice, and one might even say that the central part of Buddhist practice is getting ready for death. Indeed, such contemplations on a regular basis can put our lives into their place, can put our daily concerns, our petty concerns with things that we don't like around us, or things that we like, that we wish we had more of. We can put those into their place simply with a wish to look at the bigger picture, to contemplate the fact that we are ourselves mortal in that sense. Indeed, the Buddha says very famously in the early part of the Dhammapada, hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth. Many do not realize that we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end. That is, an awareness of our own mortality, of our own approaching death, can help us. Obviously, it can help us to be compassionate to those who are in that place, but it can help us to be more compassionate generally, and more kind generally, and more, I think, accepting generally of the way things are in our lives if they're not perfect. Because we understand that all these things will come to an end, that there's nothing secure that we can cling to, that our desire for will somehow make our lives perfect in a way of being eternally good. Now I want to turn to sort of two ways to contemplate death that we might consider. One is a traditional, and another is a sort of a more, I would say, secular way of interpreting death. The traditional way within Buddhism is that death is a central part of what's called dukkha, or the unpleasantness, the pain of life. In the main definition of dukkha that the Buddha gives, dukkha is birth, dukkha is old aging, dukkha is illness, and dukkha is death. And in a way, we can understand that death is painful, perhaps, that at least the process of dying can be painful. It's part of that pain that makes us aversive towards it, that makes us crave life, and indeed that whole syndrome of craving and aversion is what gets us reborn in the traditional understanding. So death its role in our lives is one that keeps us within the cycle of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, the continual cycle, and unending, or at least unbeginning cycle of rebirth. And that cycle is a cycle where we gain recompense for our karmic deeds in future lifetimes, if not in this one. If good, then we get good benefits. If bad, then we get unpleasant benefits, or I shouldn't say benefits, but unpleasant occurrences in later lifetimes. That's the traditional understanding, and it's a reason why we have to come to terms with death on a traditional understanding, because if we can lose our aversion to death, if we can lose our clinging to life, that is central to our ability to overcome the cycle of samsara and become awakened, indeed, in the traditional understanding. And I fully admit to being deluded enough to kind of want that, that traditional understanding to be true. I would love it to be reborn again so that, after this lifetime was over, I would have other lifetimes to look forward to. That seems to me sort of a good outcome in some sense. And I understand the Buddhist reasoning why it's not. It's just that I understand that intellectually, but from a heart point of view, I'm still clinging to life. On a more secular understanding, there is a very deep tradition within Western philosophy, going back to the ancient Greeks, that fear of death is irrational, that there's no reason to fear death. And Epicurus, the very famous classical Greek philosopher Epicurus, had a statement about this in the probably late 4th century of before the Common Era, BCE, where he said, "Death, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death has not come, and when death is come, we are not. It is nothing, then, either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exist no longer." That is, for Epicurus, death is mere non-existence, and non-existence is not to be feared. We might say that we didn't exist for eons before our birth, and we don't fear that, and neither should we fear the non-existence after our death, because we won't be around to experience it. We simply won't exist. As he says, while we're alive, we exist. But after we've died, we don't exist anymore, so there's nothing that we can fear about that. There's no reason to fear that. Now, the Buddha termed this kind of view annihilationism in the early texts, because in his understanding, this sort of view involved the annihilation of the self at death. So there was the idea that there was a real self that existed during the lifetime that was annihilated at death. Now, to be fair to a secular Buddhist interpretation, there isn't a real self during our lifetime, so it's not really, I think, fair to call a secular Buddhist interpretation of this annihilationism. But nevertheless, that's how the Buddha would have looked at, let's say, an Epicurean view. But the Buddha did say, interestingly, about annihilationism, he said that he called it the foremost of outsider views, by which he meant that it was the non-Buddhist view that was the best. It was sort of like the best way you could be a non-Buddhist. If you were not going to accept the Buddha's own view, at least you were accepting something very, very close. And his reasoning went as follows. For it can be expected that one who holds such a view as annihilationism will not be unrepelled by existence, and will not be repelled by the cessation of existence. And I think the Buddha understood that both of these mindsets that he discusses are difficult to achieve. And not to be unrepelled by existence, that is, you're not clinging to existence so much that you are creating a theory where you're going to exist forever. I think the Buddha's mindset he was thinking along those lines, that somebody who really craves existence isn't going to be an annihilationist. They're going to construct some theory whereby they exist forever, such as the theory of, let's say, the ancient Brahmins or the Jains that lived at the same time as him. So these are all ideas around at the time. And so his idea was annihilationists, well, at least they're not unrepelled by existence. They see that existence has its problems. It will come to an end. And they're not repelled by non-existence. That is, again, they have a theory on which non-existence will be a large part of reality. We're not going to exist for a large amount of time. And that ability, that wish, that ability to accept non-existence is also difficult for many people, and I think the Buddha understood that. And the Buddha Dharma involves a notion of existence and non-existence sort of in interrelation with one another. And so if we're willing to accept both sides of this, and not grasp towards existence and be aversive towards non-existence, then we're at least a long way along the path. Now, whichever of these two approaches you feel is right for you, there's nothing wrong with going with that approach. What I would say is, however you do it with compassion. Because compassion is the most important way that we can, I think, hold these difficult truths, to hold them with compassion. And looking at these videos, if you have time to take a look at some of them, you will see them, that they will just spontaneously, the compassion will arise within you. They're wonderful videos. They're videos that are heartwarming and uplifting, but also videos that are very sad and will make you cry simply by the reality, the true humanity of it. Now, in the Mahayana tradition, they talk about the bodhisattva path, where the bodhisattva path is the path of one who puts off their awakening in order to be reborn and help others. And the help, I would say, of compassionate care to people who are sick, who are dying, who are in need, that, to me, is the true bodhisattva path within this very life. It's the path that we can all either undertake on our own, by our own selves, or at least aid to those who are undertaking those paths in our stead. Within New York City, there is the Zen Center for Contemplative Care that does just this sort of palliative care and care around the sick and dying and those in need, which is so necessary, so very necessary for so many people, and can provide a great solace to people in their last days, which, to be fair, is going to happen to absolutely every one of us. We're going to all be in that situation. So I'll put a link to them as well down below. I know that most of you don't live in and around New York, so search out organizations like that in your own towns or cities, perhaps, to at least know where they are. And if you want to lend them a hand, that would be even better. As for me, it's something that I would love to do in the future. My sense of my own psychology at this point is I have this terrible feeling I would just spend my time crying too much to be able to help. But at least I can get the word out with videos like this, and we'll see in the future what happens. So enjoy life. Enjoy life. Enjoy the time that you have here. There's nothing wrong with that. But use your time also, I would say, to practice wisdom, which involves at times contemplating mortality, contemplating illness and death. And practice kindness, which is something that will arise, I think, naturally through the compassion of these kinds of contemplations. And practice calm. As I said with Simone Giertz, I think a practice of calm can aid our own ability to take in this kind of information, because when we contemplate illness and death, oftentimes, I think, naturally we get very stressed. And by practicing calm around these questions, it may indeed lighten our burden somewhat when we get to that position. Not completely, I understand. The reality of our own impending death is going to be much greater than the simple contemplation of it. But if we've gone through the contemplations and we've done the work of calm before that, I think it can only help ourselves as we move forward. So I hope that's been helpful. Please consider subscribing. Thanks so much to all of you, and I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. Meanwhile, be well.